Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Monday, the 4th of July. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 132 of the illegal Russian war of aggression. Then I will run through the headlines. Then I will introduce our guest for this evening, and then together we will look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. Leaders from dozens of countries, international organisations and the private sector are gathering in Switzerland today to hash out a Marshall Plan to rebuild war-ravaged Ukraine. The Ukraine President, Volodymyr Zelensky, who will take part virtually, earlier warned that the work ahead in the areas that have been liberated alone was really colossal. And we have to free over 2,000 villages and towns in the east and the south of Ukraine, he said. Ukrainian forces have retreated from Lysychansk as Russia claims it is now in control of Ukraine's eastern Luhansk region. The Russian Defense Minister, Sergei Shoigu, said Moscow's forces had established full control over Lysychansk and several nearby settlements. Ukraine's military command confirmed on Sunday evening that its troops had been forced to pull back from the city, saying that there would otherwise be fatal consequences. Lysychansk was the last Ukrainian-controlled city in the Luhansk region. Russian forces hit a secondary school in the Kharkiv district at 4 a.m. on Monday morning, according to a report from Ole Sinyhubov, the governor of the region. There were no reported casualties. He also said that 3 people were killed and 6 injured in an attack on the village of Bezruki in his region. The eastern Ukrainian city of Sloviansk in the Donetsk region was hit by a powerful shelling from multiple rocket launchers on Sunday, killing 6 people and injuring 20 others, the city's mayor Vadim Lyak has said. At least 3 people were killed and dozens of residential buildings were damaged in the Russian city of Belgorod, near the Ukrainian border on Sunday, that region's governor said. Václav Gladkov said at least 11 apartment buildings and 39 private residential houses were damaged and 5 houses were destroyed. The Russian cosmonauts, who were lauded at the outset of the war on Ukraine in February for appearing to show their support for their invaded neighbours with yellow and blue spacesuits, have been pictured on the International Space Station holding the flags of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic, alongside a message celebrating what the Russian space agency Roscosmos termed the liberation of Luhansk. Britain will host a 2023 recovery conference to help Ukraine rebuild from the damage caused by Russia's invasion. The Ukraine Recovery Conference will begin on Monday in Lugano in Switzerland to discuss how to rebuild Ukraine, bringing together a Ukrainian delegation with representatives of other countries, international organisations, and civil society, the UK Foreign Office said. And the UK may follow the example of Canada and seize the assets of Russians in Britain in order to give them to Ukraine. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss told MPs she was supportive of the idea that the government could seize frozen Russian assets in the UK and redistribute them to victims of Russia's war in Ukraine. Now, we are lucky to be joined this evening by a new guest to the programme. William Duguid is a commentator and blogger. In particular, he writes the To September and Beyond, which is a Scottish political blog, and he also helps to run the Perth and Kinross Yes Hub. William, good evening. How are you keeping?
I'm keeping fine, thank you. And I should point out that I haven't written my blog for 5 years, but you never know, it may make a reappearance.
We're pre-advertising it here on Broadcasting Scotland for you, so watch this space.
It's a scoop.
Keir Starmer is to set out his vision for Brexit, promising to remove a series of trade and travel barriers while insisting that the debate on any UK return to the single market or customs union is definitively closed. In a speech this evening, the Labour leader is expected to argue that the big questions over EU membership are in the past, having previously pushed for a second referendum and then the return of free movement. The speech to the Centre for European Reform think tank will argue that revisiting any Brexit fundamentals would simply cause new division, but that a series of smaller changes could be made, notably to ease trade between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. To argue about whether the UK should rejoin the EU would be to look back over our shoulder and would jeopardise public faith in politics, Starmer is to say. So let me be clear, with Labour, Britain will not go back into the EU, we will not be joining the single market, we will not be joining a customs union. Detailing a plan first outlined by David Lammy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Starmer said a key priority would be to improve trade between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, with a new veterinary agreement for agri-product trade and a system for low-risk goods to enter Northern Ireland without checks. Other proposals include a scheme for the mutual recognition of professional qualifications with the EU and a new policing and security arrangement with Brussels. While stressing Labour did not want a return to freedom of movement, the plan also includes flexible labour mobility arrangements for people making short-term business trips between the UK and EU, and for musicians and artists embarking on tours. In 2020, while campaigning to be Labour leader, Starmer called for the return of free movement, but a year later, he reversed his position. So, William, Starmer's also expected to say, but the hope that underpinned the Brexit vote, the desire for a better, fairer, more equitable future for our country, is no closer to being delivered. Now, I'd argue it's not no closer, it's getting further away, and it'll continue to drift away over the horizon as we continue to get comparatively poorer and poorer. Is that a fair assessment of what Starmer's saying?
I think it's a reasonably fair assessment. We might well be fairer in general terms, but we'll be fairer in a kind of impoverished way. There is a very big question, I think, about whether it's possible to make Brexit work by just doing it differently, if doing it differently from the way we're doing it now doesn't involve some sort of link with the single market. So I think it's pretty much the road to downhill all the way it's been posted out by Starmer tonight.
Downhill's a good point, William. The Starmer's journey towards Brexit, stage by stage, he's said that he's completed his own policy journey, having previously pushed for a second referendum and then return of free movement. As his own personal Brexit political journey has evolved stage by stage, I was wondering what that might tell us about what's going on in terms of politics more generally. Is Labour trying to take some centre ground from the Tories and hell mend the rest of us who didn't vote for Brexit?
I think there's very much been a sort of move towards making Brexit acceptable by really the three main English parties. And they all seem to be now beginning to get towards outbidding each other. And I really question where Remainers now have got to go. And of course, in a very specific area, what does all this mean for Scottish independence supporters? And I know you'll be coming to this with Ian Blackford, but where on earth have they got to go? And I don't think it's a good thing where parties are trying to converge on the centre ground. It doesn't really, for me, offer the sort of choice that voters really need to get out of basically the mess we're in just at the moment.
Now, yeah, you're right, William. We will talk about the SNP's response to the various statements from both Sir Keir Starmer and Anna Sarwar today in a moment. But it did strike me, and I'll talk to you about it just now. Ian Blackford said, Keir Starmer has strengthened the case for independence by embracing the Tories' hard Brexit. Now, I'm reminded that 30% plus of those who voted in the Brexit referendum in Scotland voted leave. So I was wondering, does this positioning by British Labour in Westminster, does this positioning will it help Anna Sarwar, or do you think it will hinder him in Scotland?
I very much doubt it will help. There was a bit of a crossover, if you like, with some Leave voters in Scotland becoming a wee bit less keen on independence. But at the same time, there were a few people who've come over towards independence really pretty well purely because it's a way of re-establishing contact with the EU. And I think the polling would tend to suggest that the ones who've come over potentially outnumber the ones who've gone the other way. That's indicated, I think, by the fact that when the Yes movement has bothered to campaign properly and in a coordinated, coherent way, that the numbers have gone above 50 and have noticeably, some noticeable peaks within that. And I do think that it's a great fillip for the Yes movement. One of the things I think we should be campaigning on is getting our act back together with the EU. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be full EU membership as such, because anything that we can do in terms of getting back towards a single market is immediately going to make things better. So, no, I don't think it helps Labour in the slightest, and I think it probably enhances their irrelevance.
Absolutely, William. And I also mentioned that Keir Starmer said that to be looking and considering rejoining the EU would be to look back over our shoulder. Now, I think there's a point of view that the world is already being transported back to the 1970s by a combination of inflation, political polarization, and war. And I suppose Kate Bush in the charts as well. It's not just the return of rail strikes, complete with a rare appearance by Arthur Scargill, now 84, nor is it the dogged refusal of Paul McCartney, who's 80, and Mick Jagger, 78, to join Arthur Scargill in a retirement home somewhere. It's maybe a more general sense of economic gloom and political disillusionment, which is much more than just a post-COVID hangover and the Ukraine war headache. I'm thinking in particular, business investment in the UK has stagnated since 2016 and lags behind most other advanced countries. That's despite the £25 billion of super deductions and corporation tax. So the timing of that investment deviation from the trend makes Brexit look suspiciously like the culprit. So if Starmer is talking about not looking over his shoulder, why does he seem to be determined to take us into the past with this change in policy?
Well, I'm sure he doesn't intend to take us into the past in that sense. But the whole idea that, let's just assume for the purposes of argument that Brexit in and of itself, if it doesn't involve any connection with the single market and the customs union and freedom of movement, is a disaster. If you inflict on yourselves a disaster, arguably the greatest act of self-harm that any country has in recent history, then why is it a bad idea to consider completely revisiting it when very likely, if you were to test it properly, the polls are going towards more people wanting to get back into the EU? I would have thought it would be an absolute no-brainer for one of the opposition parties to major on this, but it isn't happening.
Completely, completely, William. Thank you. And it's interesting to hear you channeling Michael O'Leary, the chief executive of Ryanair yesterday, who over the weekend described Brexit as a total disaster. But let's look at another aspect of Labour news, shall we call it that, from today, because Anna Sarwar, the Scottish Labour Party leader, has backed Keir Starmer's move to rule out rejoining the EU, despite 63% of Scots having voted to remain. Speaking today in London, Mr. Sarwar said, "We're not suggesting over the next Parliament that we go back into the European Union, but we are suggesting that cooperation is important with the EU, and what difference we can make if we have a UK Labour government that is working to manage conflict with the EU and looking to build the opportunities that benefit Britain by having that partnership with the EU, as opposed to the current Tory government." Anna Sarwar is due to address the Fabian Society in London this evening. I'm struck, first of all, that this is the same Anna Sarwar that said that Scottish Labour would not enter into deals or pacts or cooperation or partnership with the Tories following the council elections, but has just suspended 2 councillors in Edinburgh for not backing a deal with the Tories. So, firstly, I'm struck by Anna Sarwar apparently attempting to tell us about working in partnership and cooperation when his own approach is somewhat challenged, shall we say. But as a first point of all, why would Anas Sarwar is the leader of the Labour Party in Scotland? Why does he go to London to make speeches like this?
Well, I think they probably negotiated a nice invitation from the Fabian Society to take him down here. So that's nice for him. But you're right, it's not a good look. The geography doesn't quite work out. I think also it's quite possible. I mean, he may or he may not be endorsing specifically Keir Starmer's line on Brexit, because certainly the Reporting Scotland coverage would suggest that they're not emphasising that part of what he's saying. I think Labour have had a tendency in Scotland over the last 7 to 8 years of making mistakes and just continuing to make them. And I think you could argue that this is just another example of that. It certainly, I don't think, is going to get Anas Sarwar any great traction with the potential Labour supporters here, people who might otherwise have been interested in what they had to say, but really would like to get back into the EU. So, yeah, not a great look in summary.
Thanks, William. And the third of these connected stories today is that the SNP responded, saying that independence is Scotland's only way back to Europe. And that's as Keir Starmer confirms that the Labour Party has joined the Tories as a hard Brexit party. Responding to the news that Keir Starmer has today ruled out any return to the EU single market, customs union or freedom of movement, Ian Blackford said the Labour Party was indistinguishable from the Tories on Brexit and has confirmed that there is no route back to Europe and economic prosperity at Westminster. With Brexit costing the Scottish and UK economies billions of pounds, causing long-term damage to trade, jobs and public services, and worsening the cost of living crisis by raising costs and prices, the SNP Westminster leader said regaining Scotland's place in Europe will be at the heart of the independence referendum. Ian Blackford commented, Keir Starmer has strengthened the case for independence by embracing the Tories' hard Brexit. It is now beyond doubt that independence is Scotland's only way back to Europe and the only path to economic prosperity. Scotland didn't vote for Brexit, but under Westminster control it has been imposed against our will, costing the Scottish economy billions of pounds, inflicting long-term damage to economic growth, trade, jobs and the NHS, and making the Tory cost of living crisis much worse. It is frankly astonishing that Keir Starmer can look at all of the catastrophic damage Brexit is causing and decide to become a Brexit supporter. He continued, the Labour Party are now indistinguishable from the Tories on Brexit. By running scared of the Tories and mutating into a pale imitation of Boris Johnson, Starmer is offering no real change at all. With all the Westminster parties ruling out a return to the EU, the single market and customs union, it is clear that there is no route back to Europe and economic prosperity at Westminster. He concluded, with this hard Brexit U-turn, Keir Starmer has perfectly encapsulated why Scotland needs to escape from Westminster control. Regaining Scotland's place in Europe will be at the heart of the independence referendum. It is increasingly clear that independence is the only way to secure the powers and opportunities Scotland needs to realise our potential. So, William, my apologies. There was we quoted Ian Blackford in full there, just so everyone could hear what he'd been saying. He said that the Labour Party are now indistinguishable from the Tories, and that Starmer is a pale imitation of Johnson. Is he right?
It's a bit unfair to call Starmer a pale imitation of Johnson, because Johnson is pretty much a one-off, I suspect. However, the larger argument that the parties are becoming indistinguishable on what actually, to a great sector of the population, matters quite a bit is a serious issue for democracy and the wish for people to participate in it. Because if you cannot find an outlet for your point of view, I'm thinking clearly of English voters here mainly, because we do have a potential outlet in Scotland. If you can't find anywhere where a point of view that really matters to you can be expressed, then where indeed do you go politically, and why bother to participate in the political process at all? As far as Scotland is concerned, Ian Blackford is 100% right. We may struggle, or we may not struggle to get back into the EU. It may take however long it takes. Maybe it'll be a gradual process because we'll have pre-accession status, or there may be some other thing that the EU would wish to do for us. But the fact remains, anything is better than the 0% chance we have of re-establishing our links with the EU via Westminster.
Thanks, William. And one final question on these areas. The SNP's policy on Brexit has been at odds. It's been the opposite of the Unionists for a while. Today, Ian Blackford said that regaining Scotland's place in Europe will be at the heart of the independence referendum. Do you think that that's a vote winner? And I'm thinking here in particular of the part of the franchise which is protected in Section 3 of the independence referendum bill that was published last week. That's what I'll call the former EU citizens, the foreign nationals vote, whose position is being expressly protected and included in the franchise by the independence bill. So how important do you think this Brexit position from the SNP will be in an independence referendum?
I think in general, it's one of the positions that is a net attractor of votes. I think in terms of the EU citizens who would be able, of course, to vote in a referendum, although very interestingly, I suspect would not be able to vote if we were doing it via the general election route, but that's a discussion for another day. I think that it's quite likely, from what I've been hearing and what I would expect, that that sector of the potential electorate are very positive about independence. So, I do believe that the EU, even people who voted Leave, remember, may not have envisaged Leave being a complete separation of everything, cutting off at the neck, so to speak. So, I think it's one of the things that will resonate with voters. And if you listen to people like Gordon McIntyre Kemp, for example, who has done some polling on this, he would certainly say that that's one of the main things, the main drivers that's likely to drive the independence vote up.
Thanks, William. I think it's fair to say that yes, Gordon McIntyre Kemp's done polling, and I expect the SNP have polled on it as well, so they know the view of Scottish voters as a result of that polling. Let's move away from talking about the Labour Party for a moment, because the Prime Minister's spokesperson confirmed that Boris Johnson was aware of some reports and some allegations about Chris Pincher MP when he appointed him as Deputy Chief Whip in February. The Prime Minister's spokesperson said, at the time, the PM was not aware of any specific allegations. In the absence of any formal complaint, it wasn't deemed appropriate to stop the appointment because of unsubstantiated allegations. The spokesperson said Johnson did seek advice about Pincher before appointing him as Deputy Chief Whip in light of the allegations he had heard. Asked if Johnson tried to find out if the allegations were true, the spokesperson said, I can't get into too much detail, but he did take advice on some of the allegations that had been made, but there was no formal complaint at that time, and it was deemed not appropriate to stop an appointment simply because of unsubstantiated allegations. The spokesperson said that advice would have come from political colleagues in the civil service. Asked if the Prime Minister regretted appointing Pincher, the spokesperson said, clearly we wouldn't want anyone working in the government to behave in the manner as he is alleged to have done so. That is not the behaviour that you'd want to see in any walk of life. So, William, last week, Number 10 insisted that Mr Johnson was unaware of any specific allegations against the MP Chris Pincher, but the story has shifted, deepening another scandal about to engulf Johnson. Therese Coffey was given a torrid time by broadcasters over the weekend as she tried to defend the Prime Minister. Her line on Sunday morning was to defend Johnson was, I'm aware that the Prime Minister was not aware of specific claims that had been made. 24 hours later, a spokesperson for Boris Johnson is contradicting what Miss Coffey told us yesterday. So is Therese Coffey just the latest useful idiot thrown under the bus by Downing Street? And if she is, who's going to be the next useful ministerial idiot?
Well, the next useful one was Will Quince today, which is a lovely Shakespearean name and all very super. I don't often feel any sympathy for Therese Coffey, but I did a wee bit yesterday because, yes, I sometimes wonder what the selection process for sending these guys out to defend the indefensible actually is. And you could tell she was choosing her words very carefully when she said she had been informed by a number 10 source that there was, basically nothing to worry about. Being informed by a number 10 source in this day and age is a red flag. And she knew it. And she knew they would be coming back with more stuff tomorrow and it would be a different story again. And the next point of interest will be, did he actually say pincher by name, pincher by nature? And frankly, I can imagine him saying it and thinking it was quite a good laugh as well. And this lies at the heart of the whole problem. And that's why the Tories have got some of their old guard, such as Roger Gale, Sir Roger Gale, fuming about this because, for some reason they stay in power, but it's largely because the latest scandal always overshadows the one just before it, and there's another one coming along. So the public view is sort of drawn away from the one thing onto the other. And it's like dancing about on a sort of set of coals. I wouldn't like their job at all, going out and doing that job.
It's a tough gig, you're absolutely right. Now, Adam Biankov wrote, I think yesterday, that the scale and frequency of the recent allegations against Conservative MPs suggests that there is something quite rotten going on within the governing party. Is Mr. Biankov's assessment, was that a fair assessment?
I think there's a lot of rot going on in a lot of places. It does seem to be a particular thing for the Tories to be involved in sexual scandals at the moment, but I wouldn't wish any politician of any party to be too smug about it, because generally speaking, the atmosphere at Westminster seems to lead itself to being led astray, so to speak. And if it's not your party today, it'll be your party tomorrow. And the SNP knows that as well as anyone. So, yeah, there's a lot rotten about the Conservative Party, but it is not confined to the sexual scandals. It could be that the sexual scandals are the current sideshow. One of the things, for example, we've not heard an awful lot about, except at the fringes, in the mainstream, I mean, is what I think looks almost certainly like some form of widespread corruption to do with the contracts and PPE and other pandemic-related things. And it's like a lot of other sideshows have been able to come out and take the heat away from them. And we've never seen that really looked into. I do think it's a very problematic government, and has been almost ever since the sensible people either left or were driven out, and a lot of them were just around the time we were coming to the Brexit, how we do it scenario. So, extensive rottenness would be my judgment.
That's very fair to say, William, and I'm sure that in terms of the PPE and everything else, we'll be following the money as that story unfolds. You're absolutely right. But we'll move on now, because US investigators believe Israeli army gunfire probably killed the Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, although a forensic analysis of the bullet was inconclusive. A statement released by the State Department spokesperson Ned Price said detailed forensic analysis, independent third-party examiners could not reach a definitive conclusion regarding the origin of the bullet, which was badly damaged. US investigators were granted full access to both Israel Defense Forces and Palestinian Authority investigations, and concluded that the gunfire from IDF positions was likely responsible for the death of Shireen Abu Akleh. A well-known figure in the Arab world, Abu Akleh, who was 51, was shot in the head in the West Bank city of Jenin in May, during what her colleagues at the scene said was a burst of Israeli gunfire on a group of journalists covering an IDF raid. Abu Akleh was wearing a helmet and a protective vest clearly marked press. Last month, a UN investigation found Israeli forces had fired at Abu Adli with what they said were several single, seemingly well-aimed bullets. UN Human Rights Office spokesperson Ravina Shamdasani said they had found no information suggesting that there was activity by armed Palestinians in the immediate vicinity of the journalists. Now, William, this is a story that we're following in respect of the treatment and the killing of journalists around the world, of which this is a particularly egregious example. We reported, as I say, on the UN investigation last month, but now we have a US report. Do you think is there significance or additional weight that is added by this report coming from the United States?
If you mean, will this lead to any action being taken that stops this sort of thing happening, then I think the answer is probably no. I think this is a report that probably adds extra weight to which to most of the world would have been flaming obvious, because this does go on, and people wear their press outfits, and they wear them for a reason, and they should not be shot at, and there are just too many accidents for it to be, believable.
Thanks, William. Now then, we'll move on to a UK story now, because The Guardian reports today on the impact of cuts to state support by successive Conservative governments, which have left women raising their children alone in a much weaker position to cope with the shocks of the pandemic and rising prices of basics such as food and heating. The vast majority of the 1.8 million lone parent families in Britain, almost 9 out of 10, are headed by women. Together, they are raising 3.1 million children, more than a fifth of all children. Research shared exclusively with The Guardian by the Institute for Fiscal Studies sets out the scale of the crisis. It shows relative poverty for children in lone parent families has risen at a significantly faster rate compared with other households. Relative poverty is defined as having an income of less than 60% of the national median, adjusted for household size. For single parents, this is a measure of poverty, and it rose by 9 percentage points between 2013 and 2020 to reach 49% at the onset of the global health pandemic. In sharp contrast, the rate for children in two-parent families rose by only 2 percentage points to reach 25%. Figures from the charity Child Poverty Action Group show that there were 3.9 million children living in poverty in the UK last year, more than a quarter of all children. That's 8 children in a classroom of 30. Before 2008, lone parents were able to claim income support until their youngest child reached 16 or 19 in full-time education. After changes first introduced by the last Labour government and made substantially tougher by the Conservative-led coalition, this age limit was repeatedly cut. Now, single parents are expected to prepare for work when their youngest reaches 1, and then be in a job when the child reaches the age of 3. Absolutely, it increases child poverty, said Morag Treener, a professor of child and family inequalities at Heriot-Watt University. Single parents don't have the security to build what is required to search for work until they get their children into school or proper childcare. It's very detrimental, it's distressing, and it has an impact on the mothers and their children. So, William, the combined effect was that there was no progress in reducing absolute poverty in lone parent families between 2010 and 2019, and their incomes fell further behind those on average incomes. So in terms of the wider Tory cost of living crisis, that lack of progress, how do you think that affects the resilience of those families and, by implication, the resilience of the economy to withstand the current Tory cost of living crisis after 10 years of things getting worse?
I think it's got an obviously very bad effect on the resilience. It's kind of tragic that the Blair government set itself the task of eradicating child poverty, as then defined, by the year 2020. But that did not survive change of government in 2010, and it certainly did not survive austerity after that. Relative poverty is, it's a very, very debilitating thing, and in its own way, I think, can be as destructive as absolute poverty. in the sense that relative poverty is not only about hardship, but it's also about exclusion as well. And if I remember in Commonweal in Perth, we showed a film in the local cinema, which was called The Divide. It was based on a book called The Spirit Level by Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson, and it showed just how problematic relative poverty in terms of mental health, in terms of resilience, was. So, yes, I'm not at all surprised to hear the figures today. I'm sad to say, no great optimism that the government has any plans or indeed any great desire to do anything much about it. So I don't know what the future holds. I do fear for a lot of people in the cost of living crisis that's coming, and particularly for people in that vulnerable situation, lone parents with children.
Thanks, William. Certainly, this is a story that I'm pretty confident that we're going to return to, not least because, as you say, it appears to continue to be Tory government policy to attempt to starve people out of poverty. But let's move on to our next story this evening, because the congressional panel investigating last year's attack on the US Capitol by Donald Trump's supporters could make multiple referrals to the Justice Department seeking criminal charges against the former president, its vice chair, Liz Cheney, has said. In an interview aired on Sunday on ABC's This Week programme, Cheney also said the department does not need to wait for the House of Representatives Select Committee to make a formal recommendation of charges to take action against Trump. Asked whether the committee's hearings have demonstrated that Trump needs to be prosecuted, Cheney said, ultimately, the Justice Department will decide that. So, William, firstly, how significant is it, do you think, that it's Dick Cheney's daughter, Liz, a Republican politician, who is making so much of the running in the Senate committee's investigation?
I think the fact he's a Republican politician is certainly noticeable. I never thought very much of Dick Cheney when he was where he was, but never mind. I do think it's significant, and it is important that Republicans stand up, because if this just goes across party lines, and then the US, to whom I must, of course, say a happy 246th birthday today. Let's hope you make the 247th and on, because it's not a good thing if you do become as divided and polarized in the long term as you've been recently. But I think Liz Cheney's involvement is very welcome, and those others who've been brave, and I do mean brave enough to speak up, also. I do fear for the next 2 to 3 years in the US, and I really hope that the 2024 election does not turn into something very, very disagreeable. Let's put it that way.
That's a very good point, William. In terms of Liz Cheney's activities just now, do you think that she might be able to prise the Republican Party out of Trump's death grip, if that's what she's trying to do?
I'm not very optimistic, to be fair. I just think there are too many of them that seem to be only too happy. I mean, it could be the death grip, but there must be some agency of their own. They were only too happy to dispute the results of the 2020 election, and to keep disputing them when they were getting clear input from people who knew what they were talking about, that they were on sticky wicket.
Completely. And briefly, to broaden out the reflections a little bit, if Trump is prosecuted successfully, and that's a very big if, do you have any thoughts on whether that outcome would be the same for the US as it was perhaps when Nixon was disgraced?
Hard to say. I think the US actually recovered fairly quickly after Nixon was disgraced. Gerald Ford, for all he was slagged off as being no very bright and all that, was in fact a safe pair of hands. And, I think there wasn't then the polarization that there is now. And that really does trouble me. And it's not just the US. I mean, it is all over the place, but it's particularly strong in the US. And Trump, if he is convicted, will become a martyr, and he has offspring, and they will stand. Unless they're dragged in with him, of course. But it's not a great outlook. It's not a great outlook.
No, I think that's a very fair assessment, William. Thank you. Now then, we'll return to Scotland, because the Scottish Government is seeking views on ambitious proposals for its new Land Reform Bill, which will be introduced by the end of 2023. The bill aims to address long-standing concerns about the highly concentrated pattern of land ownership in rural areas of Scotland. Proposed measures include the introduction of a public interest test for transfers of large-scale land holdings, a requirement on owners of large-scale holdings to give prior notice to communities of their intention to sell, a requirement on those seeking land-based subsidies to have the land registered in the land register to ensure transparency around who benefits from public funding. In addition, the consultation asks questions about how to ensure communities benefit from future investment in Scotland's natural capital, and that there is greater transparency around land and asset ownership. The Environment and Land Reform Minister, Barry McCallion MSP, visited the Ecology Centre in Kinghorn to formally launch the consultation. The centre is a community-led charity that has been supported with grant funding from the Scottish Land Fund. Ms McCallion said, "Land reform is a pervasive issue in Scotland. We have a strong record of progressive and innovative land reform, but this journey is not complete. We must continue to develop and implement land reform that addresses historical inequalities, and at the same time we must rise to changing social, environmental and economic issues in contemporary Scotland." She went on, "I recognise and am fully committed to tackling the adverse effects of scale and concentration of land ownership and empowering communities in the process. I'm also clear that while investment in Scotland's natural capital is vital to tackle the climate and nature emergencies, we must ensure that our people and communities are not disadvantaged and indeed can benefit." She concluded, "Finally, we must continue to improve transparency of ownership of land in Scotland." So, William, a cynic might say it's been a busy few days for the Scottish Government, a referendum, an application to the Supreme Court, and now possibly movement on land reform. Is this long overdue?
It's certainly long overdue. When Mary McCallion says the journey is not complete, it's like you started out on the 5 coastal path and you've just about made it past Couros, and that's about it. Land reform is critical if you are going to properly address the climate emergency. It's also very, very important in terms of revitalising all parts of Scotland, both rural and urban. So certainly any move on it is long overdue. I am still a cynic about how far this move will actually go and how much it will adhere to what emerges from the consultation. I still think that also that the Scottish Government is not going to want to pick a fight with an independence referendum in the offing. So we may have to wait until after independence before things really get interesting.
You've sensed the question I was about to ask you, William, because as we know, half of Scotland's private land is owned by fewer than 450 people. So does land reform not require does effective land reform addressing the concentration not require a great deal more energy and priority? Or as you're maybe speculating, will the Scottish Government be scared of frightening away the landed gentry before a referendum?
It is possible to suggest, ever so gently, that the Scottish Government might not be that keen to have a confrontation when independence is still out there as a possibility to be voted for. I would very much hope that that changes fundamentally after independence, because it matters so much in so many ways. It just reaches into how you build a sustainable, fair, thriving economy, how you replenish the working age population. You have to get the concentration of land out of the hands of the few and into the hands of the many, and certainly into the hands of the communities. It's an absolutely straight down the line fundamental part of what we need to do in this country.
Thanks, William. And I can only agree, and I suspect that's why we'll be returning to this during the consultation and as we run into 2023 as well. Moving on, however, a £28.75 million programme has ensured 4G mobile phone coverage has been expanded in dozens of more rural areas. Improved digital connectivity has been delivered by the Scottish 4G infill programme to help people across the country from the Shetland Islands to the borders get online. The programme has reached its milestone halfway point, building and activating 28 phone masts, while the remaining 27 are on track to be connected by 2023. Residents and businesses in Bogton, near Turriff, were the latest to benefit from the programme. The mobile network operator EE is providing 4G services across all bar one of the new sites, including the new mast at Bogton, but all sites are capable of supporting multiple operators in the future. The S4GI is delivered in partnership with WHP Telecoms Limited and the Scottish Futures Trust. The Economy Secretary Kate Forbes said the availability of 4G services has proven transformational for members of these communities, who have taken advantage of new connectivity to enhance how they work, communicate with friends and family, access public services, purchase products and services, and consume entertainment. The Scottish Government wants to build on that through our National Strategy for Economic Transformation to capitalise on the ability of enhanced digital connectivity to encourage innovation and growth. We will all need to work together to create a more prosperous, fairer, and more sustainable nation. So, William, in a sense, this follows on from the conversation we just had about land reform and land use and the ability of people living all across Scotland to connect to the internet and to transact in the manner in which those who live in cities do so without thinking. But I'm aware that the Scottish Government has done much to try and address this lack of access. I'm thinking of the microwave-based broadband on Jura, for example, but there is so much more to do. Does the Scottish Government need to prioritise this more, or is it continuing to operate with one hand tied behind its back by Westminster?
Well, the first thing is the Scottish Government is doing this because it has to, because am I not right in saying that this is a reserved matter and the responsibility of Westminster at the end of the day? So are we looking at a Westminster model for doing this, which leaves gaps because things aren't, quote, commercially viable in certain areas, and the Scottish Government then stepping in to infill those areas, which is why it's called the infill programme. So that's the first thing. I do think that the amount of money that they can devote to it is always going to be limited under the current UK settlement, because we do actually work with the sort of limited budget that people seem to think operates in all economies, but actually just works in one such as Scotland, where we have limited budget, limited borrowing powers. See what you can raise in tax. That's it, guys. So I applaud what they're doing. I hope it continues to be successful. I hope they are able to ramp it up, but I do think there's a limitation.
Absolutely right. And just thinking about it a little bit more broadly again, it's a reflection of perhaps on the Scottish Government and their attempt to address the challenges that the Westminster policy has led us to, because this project is infilling 4G services, 5G is being rolled out in urban areas, and I know that 6G is currently being tested in Japan. So is this an indication that that Scotland and the Scottish Government are having to play catch up as a result of Westminster policy?
It may be. To be fair, I think I'm right in saying that the installations they're doing now in the infill are capable of what they call future evolution to 5G. I don't know about 6G, but and maybe it's that they don't feel that the 5G technology is sufficiently mature at this stage to put it in those areas. So it is another thing that's going to have to be infilled at some point. But again, after independence, And I'm not saying I'm not trying to lay out a smorgasbord of wonderful stuff that's going to happen after independence, but these are things that are going to happen. So we've got to find a way to do them, and what that means is fund connectivity properly so that we can operate as the sort of country geographically that we are. And I very much hope that will happen.
Salutary and absolutely correct words, William. Thank you. And our final story this evening is that a blood test could predict the risk of developing leukemia in the elderly population years in advance of identifying changes in blood cell production, according to new research. By identifying those most at risk, it should be possible to provide preventative or early treatment in the future to improve patient outcomes, experts say. Leukemia is often the result of the disruption to the fine balance in blood cell production, where new cells are manufactured and old blood cells die. As we age, mutations in blood stem cells can mean that the altered cells can have a growth benefit over other blood cells and outnumber them in what is referred to as a fitness advantage. Researchers from the Universities of Edinburgh and Glasgow investigated how changes in fitness advantage that occur in blood production might provide clues to the risk of developing leukemia depending on the type of mutation that occurs. The team say that further research is needed to validate these results in a larger population due to the limited sample size in the current study. Dr. Christina Kirschner, co-lead author and senior lecturer at the University of Glasgow's Institute of Cancer Sciences, said, "In knowing an individual patient's risk of developing leukemia, clinicians can schedule shorter gaps between appointments in those most likely to develop the disease and provide early treatment, which is more likely to be successful." William, we've had a number of interesting stories about medical research that's taking place in Scotland lately. We started the programme today talking about Brexit. Are you concerned that Brexit is going to begin to have a negative impact on the funding and the progress of this type of research in our universities in Scotland?
I think it's possible. I don't think it's happening yet because this is a really good piece of news, really to finish on from the point of view of your bulletin. But it's a risk. The funding is clearly a risk because the suggestion thus far is that EU funding is not being adequately replaced by UK funding. What a surprise that isn't. And there is also the question of the personnel, and are we still going to have the whole menu of Erasmus style people coming over and contributing to the learning and the research in quite the same way as we would have done had we stayed in the EU? So yeah, I'm not concerned yet. I'm really, it's great to see those things happening, but we really need to sort our relationship with the UK sharpish, and you know what that means for that, but important thing.
Absolutely, William. Thank you. Now, the Scottish Government has been consulting on a new cancer strategy for Scotland and was seeking wide-ranging views on what should be prioritised as we recover from the pandemic and move beyond. That consultation ended on the 7th of June, I think. Do we need to see a plan resulting from that consultation as quickly as possible and implemented even more quickly, if that's possible?
I always want to see things come out of consultations that match what people put into consultations. Although I would add, the other thing about consultations is it is actually quite important that people respond to them and that they respond to them in numbers. This is something Commonweal, again, another of my sort of hobby horses, has been talking about recently. They're thinking actually in terms of promoting some sort of consultation lab or consultation sort of chat facility where people get together to tell each other what consultations are out there and answer them. I think public participation is important and listening to the public is important, and it kind of cuts both ways.
That's a very good point, William. Do you think there's a prospect that the Scottish Government might listen to the Commonweal in respect of that proposal in order to provide a platform or a means to bring together all the consultations that are taking place?
Yeah, it's not a proposal for the Scottish Government. Commonweal's going to probably do this itself. I mean, just in terms of amongst themselves. Commonweal is one of the organisations you can always count on to answer consultations. And they're trying to encourage individuals within Commonweal and indeed who just support or sympathise with Commonweal to add their own little bit here and there. And I think that's very welcome. The more we can get people involved in decision making, the better it is. And I can't guarantee the government will always listen because, hey, that's what governments do.
That's a good point, William. But in an independent Scotland, we may be closer to those who should be listening to the consultations, and we may be able to be better.
We can sack them more easily too.
Well, there definitely is that. But that's all that we have time for this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to continue to develop the station, and to make new programmes for you. If you would like to support us, then please subscribe or donate to Broadcasting Scotland. You will find the link to do that on the screen now. You will also find our appeals for financial assistance on Facebook and Twitter, because the urgent need for financial support has not gone away. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work and promotes the station, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. Please like and retweet us there. And you can also find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. When you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. Meantime, we will be here again tomorrow evening with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us again then. And that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's been watching this evening, and a very special thanks to our very special guest, William Duguid. Thanks, William.
Thank you.
So I'd like to say a happy 246th Independence Day if you're stateside. I hope that you can join us again here very soon on Broadcasting Scotland. Bye-bye.